Today is the anniversary of the Los Angeles riots from 1992. And here's a look back on how it all began. Historically, there have been unjust police brutality towards the black community for centuries. Rodney King, who was unarmed, was brutally beaten by 4 police officers. This video right here is actually very historical because obviously there wasn't cell phones back then, and this was one of the few times that they caught police in the act of unjustly brutalizing a black man. It was on every news station and it was what everybody was talking about. And the black community was saying, see, this is evidence that this has been going on forever. And so these 4 officers were charged and they went to trial. Okay, but before that trial, let's talk about what happened 13 days after Rodney King was beaten unconscious. Latasha Harlins, who was 15 at the time, was shot and killed by a Korean store owner, Sunja-do, who claimed that Latasha was trying to steal something from her store. There was punching and there was like a scuffle. Up until this event, every news station was focusing on this event right here where they were beating Rodney King, because this is the first time, as I said before, that the public has seen anything like this. Unless if you were from the black community. And then suddenly, all of the media was pointing their attention to this particular event. Now, I'll tell you why that's important. In 1987, one of America's largest magazines at the time put an article out called "Those Asian American Whiz Kids." This was a prime example of the system utilizing the model minority myth to create a wedge between people of color. Because the myth states those who follow the quote-unquote American dream will supposedly get it, so that other people of color needs to get their act together. Meaning the model minority myth was used to downplay systemic injustice to other people of color. This killing was unjustifiable, fact. And suddenly mainstream media says, let's forget about the 4 officers, let's focus on this. And what happens in court is crazy. Sunja-do testified on her own behalf and said that it was out of self-defense, when clearly the video said it wasn't. What did come to light though was the fact that many Korean store owners had weapons because they constantly faced armed robberies. In fact, some Korean store owners died because of armed robberies. And clearly it's because these stores were in areas that were economically disadvantaged. Sunja was found guilty and the jury recommended a maximum of 16 years. But the trial judge only gave her probation, some community service, and a $500 fee. From my understanding, Judge Joyce Carlin was a last-minute replacement for the original judge that was supposed to take this case, and she just decided, yeah, I don't think she needs to pay for this. Now imagine if you were part of the black community and you just saw someone get off with killing a girl. You're already angry because of what happened to Rodney King. So now all eyes are now going to the Rodney King trial to make sure that these officers pay for what they did. All of the United States is holding their breath as they're watching this case unfold. With this evidence, people can finally get justice, or so they thought. On the 7th day of deliberations, the jury decided that the police did not assault Rodney King, and 3 of the 4 officers were acquitted of excessive force. That verdict was so shocking that Republican President George Bush at the time said, "What? That makes no sense, look at the video." And no one expected what was about to happen. Protesters started yelling, "Guilty, guilty," and they started throwing trash cans at the glass doors of the courthouse. And then suddenly, rival gangs in Los Angeles stopped fighting one another, came together and started looting and causing havoc. This spiraled out of control and a mass amount of people started running into markets and looting. These are some of the pictures captured in the aftermath. People started burning businesses. An innocent truck driver named Reginald Denny was almost beaten to death. Over the next 5 days, parts of Los Angeles became a battlefield. This is a family putting stolen goods into a car while a building burns in the background. This is what it looked like in supermarkets. One of the most iconic images from the riots. For those of you that live in Los Angeles, this is actually 6th Street and Western, and there's a liquor store right here. I lived literally behind this building and watched this go into flames. Many store owners lost their businesses overnight. This image is insane. This man by himself used his fists to fight off a mob of people that were trying to loot a store he was working for. Thankfully, there was some police presence. However, majority of accounts say that police were overwhelmed and were helplessly just watching. Over 5 days, 50 people were killed and more than 2,000 were injured. Over 1,000 buildings were destroyed and damaged. With a lack of police, store owners had to defend themselves. Most stores with a sign that said black owned were not burned down. Part 6, Rooftop Korean. LA is now in utter chaos. Here's a Korean store owner begging people not to steal merchandise. Can you imagine seeing all your hard work being destroyed? This man comforts a store owner who lost everything. Thousands of Koreans were calling the police, but unfortunately no one came to help. Eyewitnesses say the majority of police presence were found in richer areas and suburbs. This gave Koreans no choice but to start defending their own families. Every man born in Korea is required to go to the army for at least a few years. With this military training, Korean men organized to fight for their city. The rooftop Koreans engaged in gun battles with gangs. It was literally like the Wild West. And although these men were simply trying to defend their livelihood, some officers arrested Koreans for having guns. But people were walking around with rifles. In the midst of these battles, a young man who heroically defended his city lost his life. The violence, the fires, and the looting began to spread all throughout Los Angeles. And so our leaders had no choice but to call in the National Guard. Eventually, 10,000 Army National Guard troops were activated. They prevented markets from being looted. They assisted officers in arresting suspects and began patrolling our neighborhoods. President Bush invoked the Insurrection Act, federalizing the California Army National Guard, which helped to restore law and order. President Bush now directed the Justice Department to investigate the King case. And Rodney King himself came out on TV, and with his famous words, he asked us, "Can we all just get along?" Presidential candidate Bill Clinton also came to Los Angeles in support of our leaders. However, in the end of the day, the damage was done. And the citizens of Los Angeles, one of the most diverse cities in the whole world, mourned together. By the fifth day, most of Los Angeles was under control. A week after the riots, the largest Asian American protest ever held brought about 30,000 mostly Korean and Korean American marchers who walked the streets of Los Angeles. These marches called for peace and denounced police violence. They asked for justice for Rodney King. And although some mainstream media tried to make this a Black Korean conflict, people didn't fall for that. The marchers asked for justice for all minorities because they experienced firsthand what a broken racist system could do to people. On one side, Black Americans couldn't find justice for police brutality against them. And on the other side, that same law enforcement system abandoned the Koreans in their time of need. This beautiful picture captures the unity we need. The march ended with a public funeral for Edward Lee. His mother misses him till this very day. All the lives that were affected by the riots mattered. The fact that people lost businesses they gave their whole lives to, it mattered. The fact that people lost their sons and daughters mattered. 25 years later, at the same park they had the funeral for Edward Lee, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and whites came together to remember, never again will this happen to our city. We will have peace and happiness, and we will stay united. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led peaceful protests and was against rioting. However, he did say that riots don't come out of thin air. He said the riots were the voice of the unheard. So what is it that America has failed to hear? The officer that wrongly killed 12-year-old Tamir Rice was not indicted. The officers who killed Freddie Gray in a police van were acquitted. Ahmaud Arbery was killed by 2 men while jogging. There has still been no arrests. My friends, Black lives matter.